Uber, Airbnb, Glassdoor, Yelp, and hundreds of other services rely on reviews to deliver on their value proposition. The common thread between these businesses is the trust we place on their rating systems. So let's talk about how concepts like reputation and trust manifest themselves in 2019.
3.9 stars. What is he, psycho?
I wonder what my rating is.
3.9?
Yeah, well, I did hit that kid, so...
Okay, I gotta get my rating up to at least 4. I'm gonna need a 5-star review.
5-star ride. You can do this, Petros.
This is a heightened scenario of what we increasingly face in many aspects of our life today. Every interaction with an individual we just met is somewhat of a risky proposition. What's marketed to us as a social exchange is in fact just a business one. To further drill down into what the reputation economy means, I'll try to capture it with this definition. The reputation economy is an environment where brands are built based upon how they are perceived online and the promise to deliver offline. This is certainly a business-oriented approach of explaining this concept, but actually in the internet age increasingly, every individual is themselves a brand. So this also applies to you and me. This isn't necessarily a new idea. No matter how far we go back in human history, reputation has always mattered. But today it means more than it ever has, just as the internet means more than it ever has. In the digital age, we've managed to commoditize word of mouth by exposing individuals and entities to credible sources of feedback. This is because of a simple idea. As humans, when interacting with another human or service, we fear potentially being let down. So we need some way of filtering out bad experiences in quick time. And that's what the aforementioned businesses stepped in to solve. And the information we have today has shifted the balance of power in a business transaction dramatically to the consumer side. To explore the informational advantages the internet provides us further, it makes sense to consult Rich Barton, founder of 3 major internet companies, Expedia, Zillow, and Glassdoor.
I went in saying, we can one day become the largest seller of travel in the world, because I recognized that this power to the people technology had the opportunity to catalyze an industrial revolution in the travel industry, a giant industry. And that if we could short circuit the connection between the suppliers and the consumers and put them together one-to-one without anybody else in between, that the consumers were going to storm the Bastille and take over the industry.
So this big idea came in the infancy of the internet, but it was simple. Give people information that they've never had immediate access to before. In many ways, this is the key ingredient to building a successful internet company. But the reason why this is so interesting to me is because reputation went from being something that was a large factor in success to something that shifted the entire framework on which the winners of the old economy were built. As usual, most companies just didn't know it yet. Here's what I mean. Companies that had a large physical footprint with mostly supply-side advantages but little differentiation, like a Walmart, became less important in the internet age. Pre-internet, it was exponentially more difficult to start up and scale a business to compete with these businesses. Charles Fishman described Walmart in the peak of its powers in the Walmart effect like this. Walmart's focus on pricing and its ability to hold suppliers hostage to its own agenda distorts markets in ways that consumers don't see and ways suppliers cannot counter. The company is so large that it can often defy the laws of supply, demand, and competition. But companies did eventually find a way to compete, and that was through the internet. What the internet did was give rise to several unique businesses with demand-side economies of scale, which consequently gifted consumers with even more optionality than they could have had in the real world. As a result, businesses with clearly differentiated and superior products began eating market share because consumers met them at their respective platforms. For example, in the case of Rich Barton's companies, all of their products was just information that the average consumer had never had before. When consumers saw that they could find out what their friend was making and what their house was worth, the products Zillow and Glassdoor offered basically sold themselves. Barton's companies owned all of the demand. But for most internet businesses to take off, they still required significant trust, especially in the early stages, while the internet was still new. Political scientist Russell Hardin describes trusting others like this, quote, "If I trust you, I believe you'll look after me and my interests, that you're going to take my interests to heart and make decisions about them like I would," end quote. But by using the rating system, companies could short-circuit this otherwise extremely long, arduous process of developing trust between two parties. eBay was one of the first companies to employ a rating system on the internet to solve this problem. It was then followed by several variations, like thumbs up, thumbs down, likes, emoji reactions, and more. The idea to this simply being that if enough people approved of something, most of the preconceived biases that they had in the beginning would be erased, and their likelihood of buying the product or service was exponentially greater. For example, Airbnb was a company that designed for trust almost since their inception, and this is because they figured out that this was holding them back from their inflection point. Eventually, they found out an important stat. People who have more than 10 reviews are more than 10 times more likely to get their home booked. This ultimately changed everything for the company. Zooming out a bit, I think it's important to take a look at how these companies have shaped our culture and the way we think about digital trust systems. Jeff Bezos has a famous quote: "If you make customers unhappy in the physical world, they might each tell 6 friends. If you make customers unhappy on the internet, they can each tell 6,000. When I mentioned earlier that reputation is more important than it's ever been, it's because of this. It's said that over 90% of people are influenced by reviews when purchasing a product. There's an exponential effect on a business due to the number of positive or negative reviews they receive. In Amazon's case specifically, this tremendously helps the products they sell on their own platform. This is one way of describing a network effect, where the value of the product to a user depends upon the volume of users on the actual platform. The more reviews a product has, the more units it sells, pushing it up the search rank and restarting the cycle. This positive feedback loop kills new products that try to enter the space and monopolizes products that have been decently successful in the space for a long time. This isn't just a problem on Amazon, it's a problem just about anywhere on the internet. That's what the concept of virality really is. The issue with this is simple. In the digital age, the most powerful platforms basically collect a tax on everything on their service. So this becomes a race for traffic that converts into digital ratings, which really end up being the equivalent of powerful brands that existed before the digital era. While rating systems have made all of our lives tremendously easier, the consequences of blindly following them are still dangerous. For one, rating systems in many cases don't allow for nuance, promote healthy discussion, or even give us anything important beyond a baseline of trust. For example, in a previous video, I talked about Netflix's usage of behavioral data. One of their most important findings was that when they had users queue up their shows, they put highly acclaimed content at the beginning of their queue and then never actually watched them, opting for something like an Adam Sandler movie instead. Their decision to choose high-quality entertainment but instead watch a silly comedy is a classic example of signaling. Oftentimes, we watch certain movies or shows so that people think we have better taste than we actually do. People lie and exaggerate. This is why economists hate surveys, and it's really no different on most rating systems. In the real world, trust is built up in relationships usually over the course of years. But what the internet has managed to do is toss out our preconceived biases in many cases by simply designing for trust and relying on our tendencies to be impulsive. The problem with this is that trust and reputation is just perception. We each have personal experiences, and being asked to quantify them in a concrete way can misrepresent something much more complex. Rating systems are better suited for certain industries, but today they're applied literally everywhere. In this globalized world where reputation means so much more, our fates are deeply intertwined. Fundamentally, what digital trust systems do is they limit downside risk, meaning our chances of quote-unquote losing in the interaction is very low. This is what's known in game theory as non-zero sumness. In this theory, it goes that new technologies and services provide mutual benefit for the business and the end user. The thing is, as humans, we are constantly recalibrating our expectations, so we only have consumer surplus when a good or service provides more than we would have paid. And this is similar with our social interactions as well. But this idea doesn't sound that bad, right? Well, once again, it depends on your perception. Warren Buffett once said, "Trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really notices. But if it's absent, everyone notices." Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, you can help us reach more people by hitting that like button. Also hit the subscribe button for more content like this.